Welcome to the Courtenay podcast. I'm here today with my good friend Chuck Pierce. You may remember we did an episode a few months ago. He hosts the Restoring Men, Restoring History on YouTube. And I'm really excited to have him here today. We're live and in studio. These are two new kind of things and very exciting. So how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. I'm with my good friend Courtenay Turner, so it's good to see you. We've already been having a great conversation that you have missed.
Yes, this is true. This is true. You have missed, but we are going to have a great conversation here as well. So, yeah. So we thought we would talk a little bit about some of his favorite topics, which are also some of my favorite topics, kind of men, women, relationships, feminism, and also how all of this relates to what's going on with the banks and what's been going on with the banks for a very long time. So maybe we could start with, he hosts these men's groups, but he also hosts mixed groups. And one of the things that's so great about what he does with the men's group is building actual fellowship. And I like to think of this, I don't think I've actually talked to you about this, but I like to think of it as kind of like a counter to what fraternities and secret societies do, because those are like secret groups that are engaged, or we'll just say they share maybe not a worldview that may not be designed for the betterment of man. And what you're doing is kind of a counterbalance to that, because you're actually creating fellowship amongst men that is pro-humanity, that is pro-masculinity, and as a result, that's also pro-femininity, pro-family, and pro-humanity. So I think that that's super cool. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, we have to build and make men stronger and men of courage. So these groups do a lot of things. They make you a better thinker, because we do classical readings and we go through different readings each month. So I'll bring certain readings and then I'll add to them my own comments in there. And then I'll call on people, or they can raise their hand. So you have camaraderie, fellowship, friendship, intellectual stimulation, and the issues are focused to uncover the past, because we need to know the past, right? One of the things that the, whatever you want to call it, the left, the progressives, the communists, the Marxists, the socialists, they just evolved their name because it's such a bad idea, you've got to change the name. So the feminists, all they want to do is control, right? So if you know the history, it's more difficult to fool you. If you know the truth, it's more difficult to fool you. So the groups are great because in terms of fraternity, I guess you could have a good fraternity, bad fraternity, and none of the bad things you're talking about. But fellowship, camaraderie, C.S. Lewis, of course, Tolkien. C.S. Lewis had, Tolkien had the Inklings. Benjamin Franklin had a group. So men have been getting together, and of course this is where feminism comes in. The women sued in New York to not have private men's clubs where men can gather and have fellowship. And what does that help? You don't have fellowship. You have what? Bigger authoritarian government, right? It makes government stronger, men weaker. And if you have weak men, it makes what? A weak republic.
Right.
And you have weaker women, actually. And women, strong women, want what? Strong men.
Right.
Not weak men, really, in theory. So the groups do a lot of things. Fellowship, camaraderie, which is different, friendship, and intellectual stimulation. And I'm very excited by those groups. We have groups all over: Dallas, Beverly Hills, Orange County. Beverly Hills is next Tuesday. Tomorrow night's your group.
Yay!
Yeah. So we do the mixed group tomorrow night.
Yeah. And what's super cool is there's the remote groups that are, over computer interfaces. There's in-person groups, and then there's some hybridization of those groups as well. And I was, part of the ones when we were in California, and then I was so sad because I was remote for a while. And while it's a great experience, it's not quite the same. There is something really powerful about humans being in person, connecting in person, and having that, our hearts have an electromagnetic field up to 12 feet, they say. So, there's something that you get when you're in person with another human being that you don't get over. I'm grateful that I'm grateful you all can be a part of this conversation without having to actually be here. So, not to say that technology is inherently evil or that it doesn't have some incredible, benefits, but there is something about being in person, and that's really special. Well, that they want to take away.
Go ahead. Sorry.
What were you going to say?
Aside from,
Yeah.
it's a great way to stop totalitarians, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's also, if you look back to the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness,
Right.
I think part of happiness, and studies have shown this, is community,
Yes.
fellowship. So it's a force against totalitarians, but it's also important, I think, for most humans' happiness to have community. It's
Yeah.
also a protection, but it's just part of happiness, right?
I think so. And I think it's part of humanity because we're social creatures. And we're interpersonal creatures. That's part of how we learn. It's how we develop. It's how we process, and it's also part of survival. There's when people feel ostracized or rejected. We think that they're being dramatic, but really it's hardwired from primordial times where being ostracized could mean you might die, because if you didn't have, we depended on other human beings for our survival, and we still do to some extent today, although it's changed with the advance of technology, but we definitely still do. So when we feel like we're ostracized or we're being rejected, we fear that we might actually be in physical danger.
Yes, I mean, that came back from the tribes, right? The hunting
Yeah.
and the gatherers and everything.
Totally.
Aside from that, the atomization,
Mm-hmm.
as you and I have discussed, is a great way to control people. Itemize them, isolate it. Look what happened in the last 3 years. You saw an enhanced version of it, right?
Yeah.
And when you cut off people from each other and they're isolated, that leads to depression. And we have depression in men today, so that's a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depression in men, loneliness, high feelings of loneliness. Men don't have friends, so we do the groups too because men don't have friends.
Right.
By the way, here's an interesting fact for you.
Okay.
Women's friendships are on decline too.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Not as much as men, but
Right.
they're in decline as well. So the friendship, it's great for totalitarians, right? You want to isolate people, atomize them, cut them off from information, so you and I can't share information.
Right.
We can't share information with the group. So you do a lot at a group. You share information.
Yeah.
You can contradict the super narrative or narrative,
Yeah.
and you can say, wait, I'm not off. While all of the media is saying it, and you know this already,
Mm-hmm.
I do, but someone else who's isolated, remote, can sit there and go, oh, Courtenay said it, Chuck said it, John
Mm-hmm.
said it. I'm not crazy. Right?
Right. Right.
'Cause
Exactly.
when they go into the super narrative, it's everywhere and it's pushed that propaganda.
Well,
And
yeah.
Hannah Arendt, in her book
Which one?
Origins of Totalitarianism,
Right.
talks about atomization. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a huge part of what they're trying to do with the metaverse is and then they can just directly spoon feed you meta narratives, and you have no way of countering it because you have no frame of reference. This is really interesting. Actually, I did a podcast yesterday with Karen Hunt, who's written a 3-part series called Break Free, and it's we were talking about how with the they kind of like with the social media, what they're doing today. I sorry, I'll back up a little bit. Where we started with this was I had written a paper like back in college, and it was about the negative feedback loop of Madison Avenue and how they prey on particularly women, but it's definitely everybody. But women are a prime target for this. They prey on their insecurities, and then they offer you a solution to those insecurities, and they sell you a product.
Right.
And that's kind of what they've taken to the next level with social media. So now they're showing you all these images, and again, it's very targeted at women with these images that have been completely we've always had magazines and certainly movies and television where people are airbrushed and they're the images are not a reflection of reality. But the difference was back then, even with television, magazines, and you would step outside in the real world and you would see real people. So you could say, okay, wow, these celebrities, they're so perfect. Let's say a child or a teenager, that's the image they have. Wow, they're so perfect, and they look up to them. But they can go outside and see that that's not everybody, and that's not everyday life, and it's not necessarily real. But now with social media, it's supposedly everyday real people, right? But they're using all these apps. And so, what they're trying to create, and this is also tied to what they're doing with transgenderism, but what they're trying to create is this metaverse where now you're just locked into this screen and you have no frame of reference. So unlike the kids, in my generation, when they would go outside and they would look around them, they would say, okay, this isn't necessarily reality. Now all they're seeing is what's right in front of them in their screen, and they have no frame of reference. And that's the same thing when you think about narratives, right? Now if they can just spoon feed, and of course if they can go with the chips and where they're trying to go, they can just directly implant them, those narratives.
Yes, now think about this. You're stuck on your phone at home. You're in a room.
Right.
Let's go with the makeup, the clothes, whatever you need. If you don't have this, then you won't be liked and loved. And we know that women from the tribes wanted to be liked more,
Of
right?
course.
They were malleable, right? And they wanted to be liked because they had to adjust if a tribe was conquering you, right? So if you were conquered as a woman, you had to fit into the next tribe.
Right.
Now you've got social media, so women are already programmed historically to be liked, that like button.
Yes,
So
the like gene, the LG.
This is an interesting fact, too.
Right.
Women's suicide rate, too, and it's normally been men, right?
Right.
We're increasing for years, we're men, and I was concerned about men.
Right.
But women, their unhappiness has gone up. I just read a study the other day where women's unhappiness is going up.
Yeah.
And let's go into the metaverse.
Yeah.
When you get at home and you get in your head, and you're just sitting in your head,
Yeah.
you can magnify a problem. Instead of taking action, you can collapse internally. Instead of talking to you, saying, well, I don't think it's that. Here's this perspective. Somebody calls me and says, Chuck. I go, well, I think there's alternatives. I think we can get you out of this. This has happened. And I'll say, I think you can do this, you can do this. But if that person said, oh, I was just sitting reflecting, and you've made me feel better about it and think better about it. But when you're isolated and cut off, who's giving you that information on your phone? They can do constant 24/7 propaganda.
Yeah.
You're not good enough. You need the government.
So they can traumatize you and then feed you messaging.
Right.
When you're more susceptible after you've been traumatized.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. And then think about it. If men are going from video games to porn to this different metaverse, you're never encountering a real person.
Right.
You're living in your head and your world.
Right.
So when you go to play, and this was a study, Men on Strike. That was a book.
Okay.
So men had just felt, many men, not all, it was better to retreat to a video game. This is how defeated some men were. Because they were so defeated, they could win in the video game, but not in real life.
Wow. And that is what they're selling. Like when they advertise the metaverse, it's like essentially you can be superhuman in the metaverse. All these things that you wish you were in real life, but you can be that in the metaverse. That's how they're selling it.
Well, interesting that if you look at fact versus fiction and reality versus fiction.
Right.
Hannah Arendt, in her book Totalitarianism, going back to that, Origins of Totalitarianism, wrote about the people, the good Germans and the rest of the Germans started believing in the fiction versus reality. So let's just take it to today, to your point.
Yeah, okay.
So because this is where it reminded me of what you're saying, the metaverse.
Yeah.
If you were already in 1930s Germany willing to retreat from reality to fiction, imagine with the metaverse. And you already are altering your body. You're into porn and video games and whatever on the internet. Imagine how much you can get away with in fiction and being programmed to prefer fiction to a real encounter with you. Now, when we get together at the group tomorrow night, Saturday night, that's going to be a real experience, and I'm going to love it, right? It's going to be fantastic.
Right.
But imagine someone who doesn't have that, who never experiences other people. Maybe they even work from home. And they never leave their house except to go to the grocery or something else. How much now can a totalitarian? I don't know why we got on totalitarian, but anyway, it happens. So imagine if you could do it in 1930s Germany with Goebbels doing what he did. But now imagine if Goebbels had you on this phone sitting alone in your home, how powerful he could have been.
Right.
And add to it